All right, it is March Madness time, and we're going to have a little fun here on the show. If you are having trouble deciding who to pick, I have a little bit different way for you to make your picks in your bracket challenge. We're going to pick based off which mascot would win in a fight. So, a little bit of fun here. I'm going to share my screen as we go through the bracket. This is not how I'm making my primary bracket, but probably be not a whole lot worse than this. All right. So some of you teams need to make up your mind about what your mascot is. First game, Duke Blue Devils and Siena Saints. Okay, well, the mascot is a dog, but if you want to go Saints versus Devils, we have a religious undertones here. I don't really know what to make of the Blue Devils. I don't think it's supposed to be actual Satan, but just because I got an interesting matchup here with Saints, Blue Devils, I'm going with Saints. So they're going to win that game. Ohio State, Buckeyes, Horned Frogs. Okay, well, going to take a Horned Frog over a nut. St. John's, there's another weird one. Red Storm and what really even is that? What is a red storm? And then you've got Northern Iowa, one of the multitudes of large cats. You got a panther here. So I don't really know what to make of the storm. I believe their mascot per se is a bird, but I'm going to go with St. John's because I think a storm is stronger than a panther. All right, Kansas, California Baptist. So Kansas is the Jayhawks and a bird. So I am going to say the California Baptist Lancers are going to win that game. All right. So then going down the bracket, you have Louisville Cardinals, South Florida Bulls. Bulls beats the Cardinal. Michigan State Spartans versus North Dakota State Bisons. That's a tough one. I don't think one Spartan could beat a Bison. I really don't. However, multiple Spartans. Do the Spartans have bow and arrows? I'm going to say this is a single Spartan, and I'm going to take the Bison. All right. UCLA Bruins, UCF Knights. I think a bear beats a knight. I really do. So I'm going with the bear. Yukon Huskies, Furman, Paladins. Okay, well, that's pretty awesome. I'm going to pick the Paladins here over the Huskies. Now, going back up, we got the Saints versus the Horned Frogs, taking the Saints. Red Storm versus Lancers. Again, it's almost not even fair. I don't really even know what a Red Storm is. We're taking St. John's. Bulls versus Bison. That's Bison, Furman, and UCLA. Paladins versus Bruins. Yeah, that's going to be the Bear again. So, coming out of your East bracket, we've got the Saints versus the Red Storm. Again, what is a Red Storm? I'm taking that. Okay. Then North Dakota State Bison, a Bison versus a Bruin. I'm taking the Buffalo here. So then coming out of this bracket, I don't want to have an all meteorological final, which very easily could happen. So I'm taking the Bison partially because I don't even know what that is. Okay, so West, Arizona Wildcats versus Long Island Sharks. I'm taking if this is on land, you're taking a Wildcat. If it's in water, you're taking a shark. So, I mean, a basketball game is played on land, but I'm going to assume in this cage match, there's some water because why would you just put a shark flopping around? So I'm going with the Sharks. All right, so Villanova, another Wildcats versus the Utah State Aggies. So Utah State Aggie, I'm taking a Wildcat. I don't think an agricultural person is going to win that fight. Badgers, Wisconsin Badgers versus High Point. So that's a Panther. I'm taking a Panther. I think badger is probably meaner than a panther. The panther's a lot bigger, so we're going with the Panthers. Razorbacks and Rainbow Warriors. Okay, well, Rainbow Warriors almost carries a little bit of a mythical, legendary kind of thing there. I don't think this is your average everyday warrior. However, if you've ever seen a Razorback, very mean, very, very tough thing to deal with. So I don't really know what the qualities of a Rainbow Warrior are. How do they have some form of superpower? I don't know. So I'm going with the Razorbacks because I think they would beat your average warrior. Okay, BYU, and see, here's the thing, we don't really know if this is going to be Texas or if it's going to be NC State. So you have the BYU Cougars versus either the NC State Wolfpack or the Texas Longhorns. Okay. NC State does something a little different than most teams here. Instead of saying plural here, they've specified that it is an entire wolf pack. So you could say, well, how many Longhorns is the Texas Longhorns? If you've got a whole herd of Longhorns, that's going to be the wolf pack. But I'm saying this is one Longhorn. I don't think one Longhorn is going to beat an entire wolf pack. I also don't think one Cougar is going to beat an entire wolf pack. So NC State's advancing there. Gonzaga Bulldogs and Kennesaw State. Okay, Kennesaw State Owls. Well, there's some pretty gnarly owls out there, but I'm going with the Bulldogs. All right, this is one of the worst ones. Okay, the Miami Hurricanes and the Missouri Tigers. Okay, well, a hurricane is probably going to beat a tiger. However, the Miami mascot is a bird. So tiger's definitely going to beat a bird. There's no conversation to be had about that. But since they call themselves the Miami Hurricanes, I'm going to at least get them out of the first round because a hurricane beats a tiger. All right, Purdue Boilermakers and Queens Royals. Okay, so this is another tough one because your mascot says the Royals, but it's also a lion. So you could say this is a person in the royalty, or you could say it's a lion. Either way, I think that's going to be the Boilermaker because if you're a royal, you probably have the government behind you. So we're going with that. So Long Island Sharks versus yet another Wildcat. I already had them over Arizona, so they're going to beat Villanova. All right, High Point Panthers versus Arkansas Razorbacks. How big a panther are we talking about here? Is this like a Florida panther? Is this a jaguar? How big a Razorback we talking? I mean, that's a tough one for me. I'm going to go Razorbacks because especially if this is a a male Razorback with the tusks, I think that's going to be too much for a panther. Have you seen how big these Razorbacks get? All right, so Wolfpack versus Gonzaga Bulldogs. That's going to be the Wolfpack. One Bulldog's not going to take on a whole pack of wolves. All right, Miami Hurricanes are going over the Royals. All right, so that leaves us with Sharks and Razorbacks. Again, this is a completely is this in water or not fight. I'm going to say that there is some water involved. So we're taking Long Island Sharks here. Okay. Now that leaves us with the Hurricanes and the Wolfpack. Again, how do you fight a hurricane? I'm tempted to say that at this point the hurricane has petered out. I mean, hurricanes don't last forever. So, I mean, I'm going to use that and say the Wolfpack wins because a hurricane's not going to go through the whole tournament. So, Wolfpack versus Sharks. I think a pack of wolves beats a shark. So you've got NC State headed to the Final Four. Going to the South bracket. We're going to the South bracket. This is where Florida's the number 1 seed. All right. So the Florida Gators this is another game where the team that they're playing isn't decided yet. However, their options are Hawks and Panthers. I am taking Florida. Now, if this was a jaguar as opposed to a panther, have you seen jaguar? They eat crocodiles. So, but this is a panther. So, Florida, Clemson Tigers, Iowa Hawkeyes. That's no contest. We've already had this discussion. Tiger goes over a bird. All right. Vanderbilt Commodores versus McNeese, who is the Cowboys. That's a tough one for me. So basically, a naval officer versus a cowboy. Again, this is a water land debate. A cowboy could just be a guy who works with cows and horses. So I'm going to go with Vanderbilt. All right. The Nebraska Cornhuskers versus the Troy Trojans. I'm sure if you work in the Nebraska cornfields, you're a tough person, but I'm going with the Trojans. North Carolina Tar Heels, and got a mascot as a ram versus the VCU Rams. Okay, well, got two Rams here, but I'm going to go with VCU because of the commitment. North Carolina, are you a person from North Carolina? Are you a person who stepped in a tar pit? Are you a Ram? I don't know. So we're going with VCU. Okay, Illinois is a tricky one. This was the Fighting Illini, which would be I'm assuming an entire Native American tribe. However, there's been some changes and controversy with the mascot there. So, as far as I know, Illinois is kind of mascotless right now. However, I think that I'm going to give it to an entire Native American tribe over Quakers, who are peaceful, pacifist, so they're not going to win a fight. All right. So then, St. Mary's Gales, which if you're confused about this is not gale force winds. This is like someone from Ireland versus the Texas A&M Aggies, whose mascot again is a collie. I'm going to go with the Gales over an Aggie. Houston Cougars, Idaho Vandals. A vandal could be a lot of different things. One cougar versus a vandal. I'm going with a cougar because a vandal could be a lot of different things, and I don't think one person's going to take a cougar. All right. Tigers versus Gators. Clemson versus Florida. I'm taking a tiger. Tiger's pretty much an apex predator there. Vanderbilt Commodores, Troy Trojans. What kind of weaponry are we dealing with here? Are we talking hand-to-hand combat? Does the Commodore have a gun? Does Commodore have a naval ship? I don't know. We're going to call this a cage match. And if that's the case, a Trojan would win that. Now, if we're talking full complement of weaponry, I think that the Commodore wins. All right, VCU Rams versus Illinois Fighting Illini. If this is an entire Native American tribe, they're very clearly going to win over a Ram. But due to the controversy with Illinois and this being one Native American person versus a Ram, I'm going to take the Ram. All right. St. Mary's Gales, Houston Cougars. That's a Cougar. All right. The Clemson Tigers and the Troy Trojans. I'm taking a Tiger over one Trojan. All right. Cougar versus Ram, Ram. Tiger versus Cougar, Tiger. All right. So that leaves us with one bracket left, the Midwest. Michigan Wolverines versus, this is going to be another play-in game. So we have to figure out who would even win that game. All right. So they are going to go up against the UMBC Retrievers or the Howard Bison. Well, as much as I like Retrievers, they're not going to beat a Bison. So Bison versus Wolverines. Wolverines are really mean, but again, Bison are huge, also mean. Going with the Bison. All right, Georgia Bulldogs is my team versus the St. Louis Billikens. I got to be honest with you. I don't know what a Billiken is, so let's look it up. What is a Billiken? Looks like some form of gremlin. Okay, a Billiken is a mythical figure, often referred to as the god of things as they ought to be. It is typically depicted as a small, chubby figure with a mischievous smile and pointed ears. Good luck charm. Yeah, okay, well, we're going with Bulldog, other than the little tiny gremlin dude. So here we go. All right, Texas Tech Red Raiders, Akron Zips. Okay, that's a tough one because a Red Raider is not going to win a cage match with a kangaroo. That's not happening. However, I'm going to assume a Red Raider has a gun, and that gets pretty dicey. But since we are going to be a friendly show here, we're going to say that no guns, and Akron is going to win that. Kangaroo. All right, Alabama, you're another cop out one. Are you the Crimson Tide, whatever even that is, or are you an elephant versus Hofstra? Hofstra is the pride, which appears to be a pride of lions. That's tough. Okay. One lion is not taking an elephant. That's not happening. But a pride of lions might take an elephant. Now, it looks like Alabama's mascot is depicted as a large male elephant with tusks. So I'm taking Alabama in that. All right, the Tennessee Volunteers, they've got another play-in game matchup versus that will either be the SMU Mustangs or the Miami, Ohio Redhawks. Okay, so I'm taking a volunteer over a Red Hawk. Of course, are you the Volunteers or are you Smokey, who is a dog? Uh, I'm going to take the Mustangs in that. SMU Mustangs are going. All right, Virginia Cavaliers versus Wright State. Looks like another Husky, maybe. All right. All right, here we go again. Wright State Raiders, but you're a Husky. Which is it? Are you a dog or are you Red Raiders or Raiders? All right, so I'm going with the Cavaliers here, Virginia. All right, Kentucky Wildcats, Santa Clara. There's a lot of Wildcats on the right side of the bracket. Santa Clara Broncos. I'm going to take a Bronco here over a Wildcat, which again could probably be a lot of things, but Iowa State Cyclones versus Tennessee State Tigers. This is another one that's a little bit not fair. You're a tornado, but you're also a cardinal. I'm taking the tornado over the tiger. All right. So that leaves us with the Bison versus the Bulldogs. I'm sorry, Uga. I don't think you're going to win that one. So Bison, Akron Zips. A kangaroo's not going to beat an elephant. So Alabama's on to the next round. Mustangs, Cavaliers. I'm taking the Cavaliers. I mean, they ride horses, right? So, all right. And Santa Clara versus the Cyclones. Bronco is not going to beat a tornado. So, tornado, Cyclones going on. All right. So that leaves us with the Bison versus Crimson Tide. Elephant's going to win that. Cavaliers versus a tornado. Again, how far do you take this? How far does Iowa State go? I'm going to say the Cyclones beat the Cavaliers. That leaves us with the Cyclones versus Alabama. A tornado beats an elephant. I firmly believe that. However, we are all the way into the Elite Eight here. Would a tornado still be going after weeks of basketball games? Also, how strong a tornado are we talking here? If a Cardinal's able to fly in it, not a strong tornado. Is it going to be able to lift a elephant off the ground? I mean, if we're talking a EF5 tornado, elephant's done for. We're talking a 1, maybe the elephant's good. So I don't know. I mean, conventional wisdom says you got to take the Cyclone here, but I feel like it's kind of a cop out when we're talking cage match. So I'm gonna take the Crimson Tide. Sorry, I didn't want to pick a tornado. That just seems not fair. Okay, so that leaves us with the final four of North Dakota State Bison, Clemson Tigers, and NC State Wolfpack versus Alabama Crimson Tide. Okay. One bison versus one full-grown tiger. That is hard because if a bison really gets going, there's no way the tiger's going to take it down. I don't believe that. However, tigers are pretty much the apex land predator. So if this is in the jungle, Clemson has that. If it's on the prairie, I think the bison has it. But we're not there. We're in a cage match. So if we are locked in close combat, I think I'm taking the tiger. All right. So the NC State Wolfpack versus Alabama Crimson Tide. So this really comes down to how many wolves are in this pack, I think. Because if this is 4 or 5 wolves, they're not taking an elephant. If this is 10, 12 wolves, I could see them taking down an elephant. This is tough. I don't know, man. I'm taking the NC State Wolfpack, and part of that is bias, to be perfectly honest. I don't like Alabama. So we're going with the NC State Wolfpack versus the Clemson Tigers. So one wolf has absolutely no chance against a tiger. But an entire pack of wolves, I think an entire pack of wolves would beat a tiger. However, I also think that a pack of wolves would be scared of a tiger. And wolves are a little bit opportunistic, go after things that are weak, sick. Tiger's not weak or sick. I don't think they're going to go after that. So, shockingly, here I am taking the Clemson Tigers, which is a little bit of a cop out because I had a matchup between Iowa State and a tiger. I had a matchup between the Miami Hurricanes and a tiger. But I'm sorry. I don't think a hurricane or a cyclone is going to go throughout this whole tournament, and it's a little not fair. So, if I had let the cyclones and hurricanes continue through the entire tournament, we would have had a hurricane cyclone matchup in the final four, which I would give to so like a big tornado, I feel like is more destructive in a way than a hurricane in general. Hurricanes can be all over the map of how destructive they are. But hurricanes can also spawn tornadoes. And if this is a really bad hurricane, there's flooding, there's, storm surges. I think I would go with the hurricane. Typically kind of a longer lasting storm than a tornado. And then that would have matched them up with Clemson. And in that situation, I would have gone with the Miami Hurricanes. A hurricane beats a tiger. However, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want natural disasters to go all the way to the final. So, Clemson Tigers, how many points are going to be scored in the championship game? There's going to be a lot of points between a Wolfpack and Clemson Tigers. So, we're going to go with 180 since this bracket's not going to win anyway. All right. So, there you have it. You have the Clemson Tigers winning the NCAA tournament cage match with an asterisk. that the Miami Hurricanes would win if this was all in one round. So, little fun there. We will do a real bracket reveal. I'm gonna have some videos out telling you guys who I really think makes good picks, who I think the most likely upsets are, what my bracket is uh, really going to be. But who do you think would win a cage match? Who do you think would win in a fight in the NCAA tournament mascot challenge?